Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Public Safety Drone Review. I'm Miriam McNabb, editor at Drone Life. With me is Charles Warner of Drone Responders. Sorry to tell you that my usual cohort, Tim, is not with us this month. He will be back next month, but we have two great guests joining us on the show from Brinc Drones. You probably know them from the Lemur SWAT incident drones, but now they have a new drone as first responder product out. So we'll be hearing about that later. Welcome. We have Blake Resnick, CEO of Brinc Drones, and Don Redmond, who is the Director of Advanced Public Safety Programs.
Thank you
Well,
so much for having us.
Thanks, Mary.
welcome to both of you. And we're just going to wait just one quick minute for everybody to get in here, and then we will get started.
Fantastic.
And I will just add that Blake also received our Public Safety Leadership Award at the conference at Busch Gardens back in March.
Yeah, thank you again for that. It's very meaningful to me.
Absolutely. And please, as always, we are delighted to have so much audience participation. This has been a really great program for Charles and I and Tim. We love it. And definitely audience participation is a big part of that. So please put your comments and questions into the Q&A or the comments, and we will see those as we go. All right, looks like we have a lot of people in. I think we are good for right now. So let's get started. As usual, we're going to discuss right now some of the news of the day related to public safety and fire drones. There's a lot of news going on. I think definitely if you search law enforcement drones on Google News, you get lots and lots of stories about new programs standing up. That is great news. The Brinc was in the news a lot this month with new programs. But I sort of decided that we should go a little bit deeper into some of the more complicated things that are coming up as public safety drone programs do scale and become kind of more prevalent. So, hey, just diving in with a big one, facial recognition. So the first story that I had was actually from a technology post. It was biometric update, and it was about how the US police were launching drone programs, but not using facial recognition. And interestingly, because this was a tech-based publication, you know, they were sort of just commenting on it. Facial recognition tends to be one of those buzzwords with a negative connotation. It's kind of like the word surveillance, which I really try so hard not to use. Um, so let's just talk about sort of what the uses might be. How is facial recognition used? Don, in your experience, how is facial recognition used now not on drones?
Yeah, it was interesting when I was at Chula Vista. I got asked multiple times if our drones for public safety had facial recognition, and fortunately, unfortunately, at the time, we were actually using our we'd issued cameras, phones to all of our officers, and that had facial recognition on there for identifying people with no ID, legal stops. Then California had a moratorium on the use of facial recognition, so that all stopped. But it was interesting. I had multiple people ask, do drones have facial recognition? And the concern always is that privacy, right? We're kind of going down that slippery slope. Drones flying around all day long with facial recognition. I always laugh because there's so many fixed cameras throughout the community that could have that same technology, but they're focused on drones. So I think for agencies that are looking at this as facial recognition becomes more available for drones, that is definitely something that they're going to have to work with their community, definitely have strict policy on how they're going to utilize that. If you're looking for a specific person, maybe it's an Alzheimer's patient who walked away and now you're looking in a crowd for this person, or a runaway or something, there could be definitely some uses for it. But I think it's going to be a challenge just having broad spread use of facial recognition for the community.
Yeah, and I think you make such a good point because this is a real communications imperative, I think, for all of us is people just sort of don't think that you know facial recognition on a drone, it's like science fiction movie, but they don't think about where these technologies are now, that they are on people's phones, they are on fixed cameras, cameras are everywhere, especially if you walk around Europe, there's CCTV cameras everywhere. So I think it's important to kind of scale this for people like, hey, let's be reasonable. The world's not ending. There isn't some big
Yeah.
new horrible thing happening. Uh,
Yeah,
in
but I
a
think
way.
all things are similar in technology. All the new stuff has a new consideration to it. So it's like another thing. And the other part about it is I think what I've heard from people is because it's traveling over longer distances and has more ability to see into places where you can't see by these other stationary cameras. So it's different. It's not really that much different. And I think in most cases we're dealing with the privacy rules the right way and we're not using it for random surveillance. So this
Right.
too will change over time, probably.
Yeah.
I think the key is to have those policies in place before you implement any kind of, because if it's a surprise to the community, it's going to be it's going to kill your drone program.
Yeah.
I'll just build on that really, really quick. I think there are some capabilities and some features that are just so controversial that they can threaten these programs. One I would put out there is weaponization. I think facial rec is probably second, like to that weaponization point. And there are just so many non-controversial use cases for public safety drones that are obviously life-saving and obviously a public good. And I think we're all just better off focusing more on those, to be honest. I mean, it's still first, second inning maybe of like public safety drone technology in general. There are so many use cases that are incredible and uncontroversial and won't threaten these programs. Why not build programs around those?
Very good point. Very
Yeah,
good point.
and I do think we saw what happened when the suggestion of using a taser on a drone
Oh,
was
yeah.
suggested.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly not something I feel particularly good about.
Right.
And I mean, the whole point of Brinc, I mean, what we're trying to build are these like citywide networks of 911 response drones that can drive down 911 call response times to 70 seconds and clear out low priority calls and deliver AEDs and Narcan and EpiPens and flotation devices whenever any of those payloads are needed. And like the upside for communities are just so vast if they do adopt something like this. Like, why risk that adoption by introducing these features that are really going to make people nervous? I just don't think
And,
it's worth it.
and I think the other thing is not just are they going to make people nervous and possibly kind of build confusion about what the benefit is, but you do risk to people coming in and writing drone specific laws and having been in the industry since 2014, we have seen a lot of state and local laws that really just weren't necessary. You don't need to say you can't be a peeping Tom with a drone. You can't be a peeping Tom, like, period. That's already a thing. You don't need something that says specifically about drones. And particularly, police are so regulated in this country. They are already very heavily regulated, held to an extremely high standard. You don't need sort of new stuff specific to drones, in my opinion, in most cases. So, all right, excellent points. Moving on. Um, what do we got here? Okay, this one is something that we talked about very briefly in the pre-show, And Don pointed out that, of course, Chula Vista did things backwards. That's, hey, but there's a point about this because I was at the Energy Drone and Robotics show and attended some of the sessions for the Drone Responders co-located event. And one of them was about kind of getting your drone program started. And there are still just many, many, many communities who are still in those very early stages of getting these drone programs started. And so it's important to note that if you're still not sure how to work within regulations, if you are in a really complex environment where you're going to need a lot of waivers for flight beyond visual line of sight, where you're still sort of going to have to work through a lot of regulatory stuff, there's still tremendous benefit in just having a drone in the trunk. Um, that can actually offer a ton of benefit to the community. So you don't have to go straight from, zero to full on waiver beyond visual line of sight right in the middle of a highly, highly dense area. What do you guys think about this?
Well, I'll start first. I just wanted to say I think that it was unique because we were also in the IPP, a new program with the FAA. So this idea and concept had come out of Mexico. They had been doing a lot of flights and testing it, and then I think it was just this ingenuity of Fritz, the team, and then Chief Kennedy of being one of those innovators wanting to go do this bigger than life thing. And I guess the drone thing, that was kind of the first impetus, and that IPP. And thank goodness Chula Vista did what they did in the IPP, because we wouldn't be where we are today.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You need trailblazers. That being
Yeah,
said,
yeah,
They're
it's
they're great.
interesting.
They're great cases for drones deployed from the backs of vehicles, both flown locally and also flown from teleoperation centers. I mean, I think especially when we start talking about sheriff's offices, for example, that have just humongous jurisdictions, it's not going to be particularly practical to install, hundreds upon hundreds of drone nests to get, full jurisdiction-wide coverage. It's just not going to happen. So maybe the areas with high population density, you have some of these drone rechargers that can deploy the things to respond to 911 calls, and, everywhere else it's supported by drones in the backs of vehicles.
yeah, and resources too. I mean, I split my time between a major city and a small town. And frankly, we have very few police. We have very, very little crime, and they don't have the resources to stand up as a sort of huge program, and nor would that be sort of reasonable, right? So it's kind of where you're at, but I feel like there's a role for drones in whatever capacity.
Mhm.
Yeah, where I really see where we as an industry fail when I say public safety, in I think we all recognize drones can be used for a whole dozens of different solutions in here, and where we could ramp this up is when we start documenting the use cases of it. So that agency that has that one drone in a trunk, if they deploy that drone for a traffic collision, and they can document and show administration that, hey, with this drone, this intersection would have been closed for 8 hours while we investigated, but with the drone we opened it up in 2 hours, in a quarter of the time, and that impact made it better for the community, right? And you start showing these use cases, how the drone was used to de-escalate. If you've got a foot pursuit and you got a perimeter set up, and you're looking for somebody, and you launch the drone and you found that person within minutes, now you can shrink that perimeter, you have less resources, and you can show the return of an investment on your drone program. I was in leadership for law enforcement. When you can show that a drone can impact your staffing, can improve your community, then the money starts coming in to expand your program, because you get communities start going, oh, well, if we have one drone that did this, why don't we have 5 drones that would do even better, right? And you start seeing more investment in the drone industry.
Yep. Okay. We had another article on kind of comparing the drone usage in Texas because these were all sort of places that published detailed reports on their programs. So we had Texas. I know my features editor wrote about that. He's based in Houston. Then we had Canada and we had the UK. So three very different areas talking about their use cases, similarities and differences. I mean, of course, from my perspective, the most striking difference is that they're all getting a lot of benefit, although they're doing very different things. Also using very similar aircraft, even though they have very significantly different use cases. Any thoughts about the major differences? What we saw was, of course, in Texas, we have a lot of border control issues. That's a big use case in Texas, as in addition to sort of regular law enforcement. In Canada, we're doing more sort of large area search and rescue, that kind of thing. Uh, Everybody does search and rescue, of course. It's a major use case. And in the UK, sort of I saw it as a little bit the things they were reporting on were a little more targeted, sort of chasing suspects, kind of stuff. What did you guys think?
Well, I'll tell you that what's interesting is both Canada and the UK are still behind the United States as far as public safety. We've taken off in a great direction, and we're having great communications. I don't know if you've heard this or not, but we've got the Global Emergency Robotics Coalition, which is a bunch of us that are around the different countries starting to share information. That sharing is really what's helping to move things. But Canada wants to do DFR, but they're not yet there yet. They're still working through some of their regulatory stuff. In the UK, they do a lot of search and rescue in a lot of the areas. It really depends on your constituency and the areas that you're operating to determine how the uses play out.
Mm-hmm. And I guess that's the point, right? Is that everybody gets benefit, but I think we tend, when people outside of the industry hear drone as first responder or hear law enforcement drone or even, sort of public safety drone, they're sort of thinking that everybody's doing exactly the same thing. And that's just not true. There's so many different use cases, um, you know, crime scene, documentation, traffic clearing, large event, safety, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. When we were started launching drones, whatever 5, 6, 7 years ago, we were just thinking of the video stream of it. But now we've got drones flying indoors. We got drones that we can communicate, have two-way comms with people. We've got drones now that can deliver payloads, right? If you've got a hiker that's having a heart attack on a trail, you can deliver an AED to their companions to give them life saving. Or if you have, I mean, we're seeing it all over the country where life preservers, are being delivered out to drowning, people who are struggling out in the water. Drones have just become this, no longer is it just video streaming, it's so much more. And it's nice to see other countries are looking at the US as kind of the ground zero as to how drones could be used for public safety.
And the fact of the matter is that you need the drones to be in the air somewhere before anybody around the world can gather the data to make the safety case, right? So it's good that in this situation we're actually leading the charge and providing the data that shows the rest of the world that this is a good
I think
tool.
that's the most important thing that you said is it's the drone is really a way of transmitting some form of data. It's either data streaming, video streaming, or it could be sensors, radioactive, hazmat, uh, everything now, and delivery. So, but it's delivering something.
Mhm. All right, so this is possibly, I have to say that this is not something I have any expertise on. And I guess why I brought it up is because it was a little concerning to me. This is warrant versus no warrant, so a new Tennessee law finally allows law enforcement to continue to use drones without a warrant. And I guess the reason I thought this was worth mentioning is because when you look at those reports, for example, from Texas, the vast, vast, vast majority of the use cases were warrantless drone flights. You don't need a warrant to document a traffic crash or something like that, right? So
Yeah, it was interesting. You brought it up earlier that, for some reason drones are seen as this different entity that already isn't already existent. With law enforcement, as you said, we're under strict guidelines already, right? If we're not allowed to legally be in an area, including, I'm looking at Blake's window right there in the background. If we, as a public safety, launched a drone and flew in and looked into his window with that drone and saw something that was illegal, that would have been thrown out in court. He would have a civil case against law enforcement. So there's already parameters set up. So the idea that every time we launch a drone, we should get a warrant, and that kind of goes back to when we look at DFR, where if we're launching a drone, it's because there's an emergency in place, right? There's already something in place. And to me, my perspective has always been, anytime you call 911 or you call the police department or fire department, it is an emergency, right? You're not calling them just to check on something,
right.
right? And
Right.
even
You are
unknown
you do
problems.
not want somebody to be applying for a warrant after you've called to 911.
Yeah, yeah, and to get, to only be launching when law enforcement knows what is happening. And you talk to any police officer, you know, half the time, if not more, when you're responding to a call, you don't know what that issue is, right? Until you get on scene. And so having that drone there, and any legislation that requires agencies to know ahead of time before the drone in there, really does not help the use case on drones and getting them there first to provide real-time information to first responders for de-escalation, for better informed decisions.
And this is where you hear about the fruit from the poisonous tree. That's the whole idea that you've illegally obtained evidence. In this case, what we're seeing is judges really don't want to be bothered for search warrants for things that don't need search warrants. And they ask you, why am I doing this? And sometimes they get angry and say, I'm not going to give you a search warrant. So even if you had a law that said you have to have one, like we did in Virginia, they won't necessarily give it to you. And, go along with it. The bottom line is if you need a search warrant, you need a search warrant.
Yep. Plain and simple.
And I think that communities, for the most part, are really pretty supportive of their police. We all recognize that we have the luxury of living in, a very safe place. And I think that we appreciate and respect that. So I think that the message needs to be consistent that, you have to let people do their job. They're doing it well, and you have to let people do their job. All right, this one's worth just a very quick mention. This is a proposed drone ban in California of Chinese drones from State Senator Tom Umberg. And the reason that I bring this up is honestly, one of my writers had an interview with him, and he was very careful to say that they had received a lot of feedback from public safety in the state based upon their original proposal, and that they were making significant changes in response to that feedback. So I bring it up here for our public safety community that, one of the reasons we try to tell you what's going on, and there are a lot of sources for finding out what's going on, is because it is worth engaging in feedback. We're at a very early stage in this industry, and I think our lawmakers are, at least open to hearing what we have to say. Okay. Now, the next one is unfortunate. That this is it's kind of negative press. It's from a EFF. I don't know exactly what that is, but they're talking about drone as first responders and the kind of proliferation of drone as first responder programs, which of course we consider a positive thing, but conflating it with surveillance. And I guess one of the concerns that I had here that I wanted to bring up is back in the day, I can remember Michael Huerta, then administrator of the FAA, saying that the proliferation of state regulations would really damage the drone industry, that it led to a patchwork quilt of regulations. And that's a problem for any agency that wants to be involved in kind of multi-agency collaboration, you know. As you know, Charles, right? I moderated the panel on uh the Marine Marathon Overwatch that needed like 5 or 6 different departments from 3 different jurisdictions to work together. If you have different laws in each state, that causes a problem. But it also, of course, makes it incredibly difficult for the providers, because if you've got to produce equipment that meets particular regulations, and they differ by state, that's a serious problem. So we'll see what happens. Anyone else have thoughts on this?
I mean, I mean, I agree with what you're saying. I think everybody recognizes that, one state shouldn't have different, guidelines for flying drones. I think the FAA has made it very clear on their position that they control the airspace, and it should be consistent across the country. And it makes it easier for first responders also to have a set template moving forward on, if you have this airspace with this, these details, then you can get a waiver under these circumstances. But then you have to look at different states and the different challenges that they have that plays into it to really. I mean, I think everybody on the call will recognize drones are life-saving tools, and we just want to do it to make communities better and save lives. And let's just get a consistency across the country.
Yeah, and not make again laws specific to drones when they already
Right.
exist
Exactly.
for other things.
Yep.
Okay, one more before we dive in. And this is actually kind of a segue specific to Brinc, because I think, one of the things that you did with the lemur drone, if people aren't familiar with the lemur, this was one of your first offerings, in different variations, but was that you offered this two-way communication. So the next article is about fire departments, lifeguarding. Again, Don mentioned this earlier. This is a big one. It's summertime, getting drones out beyond the break to be able to monitor for things like sharks. And also, I'm all good with that if they want to monitor for the sharks, but also to drop life-saving equipment if somebody gets into trouble, but also equipped with PA systems. And I think that this idea of communication, either a PA system, just delivering information where it's needed, but also kind of communications, is actually not done enough necessarily with drones. I don't see that payload as often. What do you guys think? I just haven't been paying
Yeah.
attention.
Yeah. Blake, I'll let you take that one, Blake.
No, yeah, 100%. I think two-way audio on drones is an incredibly important and useful feature. And we've been doing it pretty much longer than anyone. I mean, even the first versions of Lemur had that as sort of a core function. And every drone we've ever built has two-way audio. So, I mean, just in the context of this, like, life preserver example, you can issue instructions, right? Maybe drop the thing. A lot of like rest tubes, for example, they have a little nitrogen cylinder that activates the second that it touches water. Thing inflates, person can grab onto it. You can tell them, help is coming, go in this direction, or don't move, or whatever is the right piece of advice in that moment.
And
Or
we've been talking about AEDs, right? But I mean, I'm not I wouldn't really know what to do, so I would be much more comfortable if you delivered the AAD and had someone explain to me what to do with it.
100%. I don't think I mean, we'll see. I don't think we'll ever build a drone without a two-way comm system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I was
technically,
just gonna say, I think I'm sorry. I think that search and rescue is helpful. You can give instructions when you're out in the field. For law enforcement, they used to have to drop phones in windows or throw phones somewhere to communicate. Yeah, I think that's going to be a bigger part of communication on drones entirely audio both ways, and they'll be able to record now with not only video but audio because there's so much more context that comes with the audio than just the video alone.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then looking at the use case when Turkey had their massive earthquake and the buildings collapsed, we sent a team out there with the lemur, flew it into these collapsed buildings, landed it, and then made communications inside the building. If you can hear us, make some noise, right? Something of that nature, so you can bring first responders easier, quicker to help is on the way type of a thing. So
Yeah.
the two-way comms, I think it also has a we have to watch that slippery slope because you're going to get that activist who says, hey, these drones can fly around and listen to our conversations as we're walking around, or you can listen to what's happening inside somebody's house. We know that can't happen, but it's one of those where we just have to make sure that the policies are strict on how we're going to utilize this technology.
I think also I like to think about drones as delivery mechanisms of like you're delivering a camera, but you're also delivering information, right? So
Absolutely.
as Blake said, if you want to be able to tell people, okay, we're dropping a life buoy, but the lifeguards are on their way to you, just, hang on or do whatever, you can be delivering information. All right. We have a chat. Carlos, thank you for asking if the file with the article URLs will be shared. We will share those. I just have to figure out how to get it into the chat. Usually
I'm
Tim's over
working.
here
I'm working.
typing while I'm
I'm working on it.
talking.
I'm working on it.
Okay, so we will get you those. Thank you very much. Okay. All right. So let's talk about I'm always, I'm fascinated by the lemur ever since I first saw it. Also really fascinated about the Brinc process, which was just very much purpose built. Blake, of course, you have a fascinating story about this. But let's dive right in so that people have time to ask their questions into your newest product offering, which is a drone in the box or Nest DFR product. Take it away.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we just released the world's first purpose-built 911 response drone, or DFR drone. So, as I'm sure everyone in this call already knows, Chula Vista was the first DFR agency. But they, and basically every other agency that has adopted DFR so far, has been using commercial off-the-shelf aircraft. And they're really good. They're very capable, but we think the future of the space is really purpose-built DFR birds. And Responder is the first ever drone of that class. It won't be our last, but it is our first. So it's kind of like somewhere, I don't know, a little smaller than an M30T, somewhere between like a Mavic and an M30T. It has 42 minutes of flight time, full HD video, 40x total zoom, 20x optical, 640 thermal imager. So really nice optics payload. It runs on 4G LTE and also a mesh networking system. So you can fly this thing from your laptop, use the arrow keys or WASD, control all the accessory functions. One thing that's kind of cool though is with our mesh networking feature, Responder can actually extend the range of Lemur 2. So if you're flying Lemur 2 around inside of a house, then you have Responder 200 or 300 feet providing overwatch. Now you have an aerial repeater. So all Lemur 2 has to do is punch a signal through a roof, relatively easy versus punching a signal through like a dozen walls horizontally. It's getting rebroadcasted from altitude, and now your handheld controller could be like a half a mile away. So I'm very excited about that. We can also actually build out dedicated repeater sites in various locations around a city to ensure that you always have coverage. So, you have 4G LTE as a backup, but ideally you also have this mesh networking system that allows you to communicate with the drone with really high levels of reliability. Responder also looks like an emergency response vehicle. It's white, black, red, and blue. It has red and blue lights. It has a siren. So if you do want to communicate to someone on the ground that, you're there, first responders there, you can absolutely do that. You can also use the drone like a flying cell phone, kind of like we were talking about. So it utilizes the speaker and a microphone that's mounted up front in the aircraft. We have the ability to deliver emergency medical payloads. So you have roughly a 2-pound payload capability. So you can carry Narcan, ADs, EpiPens, flotation devices, any of the above. We actually found the lightest AD in the world, which is called the Fred EasyPort, weighs about 500 grams. It only kills around 7 minutes of flight time. That is our heaviest payload, by the way. So it'll take you down to about 35 minutes, which is still absolutely usable for these types of missions. And then the drone deploys from a robotic charging station. So something that can be installed on top of like police and fire station roofs and automatically dispatch drones to respond to emergencies in seconds. It's all kind of powered as well by LiveOps, which is our web software. So that's what allows you to teleoperate the things. You can view a map of your entire jurisdiction, the locations of all of your stations, the locations of your drones, call for service locations. We also can fuse manned air traffic information into that same visualization. So you can see the Cessna and it'll give you, a warning if that Cessna happens to be at low altitude. Yeah, I can like go on and on about this. So I'll stop there and see if you have any questions and we can get into details if that's interesting.
So we want you to go on and on. And one
Sure.
thing that I really have a question about is this description of it as a purpose-built DFR drone. And as I mentioned before, I don't know how many times I could use the word fascinating, but the purpose-built aspect of Lemur is really interesting, and the way you did ride-alongs, and tweaked that over and over until you got what was necessary in the field. So beyond the red and blue lights, what makes the responder so significantly different than a similar commercial product, than a commercial drone in the box, drone in a nest, remote?
I think it's a little like the difference between a GoPro and a body camera, or like a Prius or a police interceptor. Like this is just really fit for purpose. And it affects everything across our entire offering. It affects the drone hardware. It affects the station hardware, which is our recharging nest. It affects our software. It affects how our software integrates with other pre-existing software platforms on the evidence management side, on the ALPR side, on the CAD side. There really is a lot there. A couple things I'll point out, which I think are unique. First of all, our solution is compatible with ADS-B receivers and with ground-based radar. So one of the biggest problems with DFR in general so far has been the requirement for visual observers on top of rooftops to monitor the airspace and then tell teleoperators to land their drones or to stay away from manned aircraft that they see. And this is a big issue because it just makes DFR so incredibly expensive. So if you want a couple of launch locations, now you have to staff, 3, 4 roles 24/7, if that's how long you want to operate. And even at minimum wage salaries, that becomes wildly expensive, like $250,000 a launch site. And what visual observers are making, they're not minimum wage salaries. So it prices a lot of agencies out. The other thing I'll mention is, okay, maybe you want to use internal assets to, fulfill these roles. But a lot of departments are struggling with staffing. Like they might have more budgeted headcount than they're able to fill because of issues with retention or recruiting or whatever else. And that's like one of the amazing things about DFR. It can clear out a quarter of low priority calls. So if you get that 911 call saying there's an obstruction in roadway, drone arrives, you realize that someone else moved the obstruction, you don't have to send an officer. Or if you get the suspicious person call, drone arrives, person isn't there, isn't suspicious, you don't have to send an officer. So anyway, if one of the core advantages of DFR in general is that it allows you to do more with less, with fewer people and focus on the more serious emergencies. And at the same time, you have to staff DFR a lot because of this FAA regulation. These are kind of conflicting objectives. So one of the core things we wanted to solve with our DFR solution is BVLOS without a VO. And we're doing that through this fused combination of ADS-B receivers. So if an aircraft is transmitting their location, we can grab that location through ground-based radar. And we partnered with Echodyne, who's one of the best radar manufacturers on the planet, in order to do this. So all of your non-compliant aircraft, sport aircraft, or whatever else, we pick those up too. That gives us a comprehensive view of your airspace. It allows us to automatically route drones around those aircraft or ground them as necessary, which is great from a safety perspective. But it also allows us to apply for BVLOS waivers without a VL. And we worked with Redmond Police Department, who's close to our headquarters in Seattle, to submit something like this. They did it, and they're waiting on a response, utilizing Echodyne radar and some other technologies. So we're incredibly excited about this. If this waiver is approved, I think it opens up DFR to a very large number of agencies that before just couldn't do it because of the staffing requirement.
Right.
Yep, and I'll add. I know Blake has said a lot there, and I'll back up a little bit. I know you know we talked about the color, that's not important, but it was interesting when Blake came to me. He's like, "All right, we're going to start building the outdoor drone. What's the first thing we should talk about?" And I'm like, "The color of the drone." And he kind of laughed at me, but I said, "I got asked constantly, how does the community know that that drone that's flying around in the airspace is a public safety drone and not a commercial drone?" Because I had a lot of complaints about drones that they weren't ours, right? So I said, hey, let's have a color specific, we couldn't make it all black and white because fire departments wouldn't use it. We couldn't make it red because police departments wouldn't use it. So we found this color scheme where you can have, your customized with your batch or your city emblem. I know at 400 feet, you can't see the color of the drone, but where does the media take the picture of the drone? When it's sitting on the base station, right? And then as simple as when you talk about it having red and blue lights, I know that's a simple thing, but when you say, hey, for the privacy issues, because when the activist said, hey, we talked about surveillance, right? We talked about this and we said, hey, we're not going to be running code 3 across the city with the lights and siren, but the idea is if you have red and blue lights on there, and if you want to make notifications, you turn on that siren so the community knows that that is a public safety drone. It's easier for you to sell it to the community out there, as opposed to this surveillance tool. So that's one thing that we're able to do for public safety that a commercial company isn't going to be able to do. And then also for the, my agency, we had 20 drone pilots, 8 different drone platforms. Cops, public safety, they like easy, right? So all of our drones utilize the same controller. So when you're flying the Lemur 2, it's the same controller for the responder drone. So they don't have to learn different technology. It's the same drone platform. It's easy to transition from one drone to the next without having to do it. So everything that we're doing, we think of the end user in mind. How does public safety going to utilize this? And just like Blake has done an outstanding job building the Lemur S and the Lemur 2, all of those upgrades were directly from public safety as to this is what we need for it.
The other thing about your lights is that it's going to be very important for your collision avoidance in the air for manned aircraft. That's one of the things that they've said from the FAA's perspective is that when we have lights blinking in the air, that means it's something that can kill us. And without the right collision avoidance, they have a lot of confusion of birds and stuff. So this really helps to distinguish it more as well.
And I think the visual understanding of what it is and what its purpose is can really not be overstated. The importance of that visual understanding. When we see a black and white car, we know who that is. All right, we do have a couple of questions that I would like to address before we get too far away. Now, this one, I'm not sure I understand the question. I'm hoping that you guys will. I was under the impression that beamforming would prevent cell towers from working effectively with drones flying at altitude. What kind of 4G LTE bandwidth are you able to achieve at altitudes that would be typical for a Chula Vista style DFR flight?
Yeah, we're actually seeing really good results with 4G LTE at 400 feet above ground level. Significantly better than at the ground because you're just not dealing with so many line of sight obstructions. You're not dealing with, buildings and trees and everything else being in the way. You just have more of a direct shot from the aircraft to a cell tower. So that's working quite well in our experience. But this mesh networking features, it's really a unique thing and makes our solution incredibly well suited for DFR deployments. Because think about utilizing a DJI drone, for example. If you're struggling to get range in a specific location somewhere in your city, like what tools do you really have to fix that? I mean, DJI drones just have one link from an aircraft to a controller. You can't go out there and install separate infrastructure to build out a larger network coverage bubble in a specific location. With our technology, that is exactly how it works. If there is a part of your city where you're struggling to get good comms, but you have to fly in regularly, you can install one of our radios as infrastructure that's hooked up to the internet, and that is a really reliable data pipe in order to feed back, video and send command and control information. So just talking a little bit more about like what makes our system really fit for purpose, that would be another example. Or the fact that our nests can deploy drones in like 5 seconds. Other manufacturers have nests, but sometimes it takes them a minute to launch a drone, which for automated industrial inspection is no big deal. It's like completely fine. But if you're talking about responding to an active emergency, that minute is pretty painful. And, our stations can deploy drones in like 5 seconds. So there are just like a lot of these things that are made across the board. On the software side too, integrations with popular evidence management or integrations with real-time crime center software suites. So all the videos that these drones are generating are being sent to a big screen somewhere where people can really benefit from the situational awareness that they're able to provide. Yeah, this is like another thing I could go on and on about, but I just wanted to make that point.
Let me ask you a question. You talk about the additional sensors that you can put in for the infrastructure to create more of a network. Have you thought about using that to communicate with any of the other things that are happening out there for airspace awareness, where others are trying to put the same kind of technology in place, and which will play a role in advanced air mobility and all the things that come next?
Yeah, it's a good question. It can absolutely make sense. I would say the challenge and maybe where that isn't a total natural is we just have to stream a lot of data. HD low latency video is a lot of data compared to what some of those sensors are generating. So there are, in some cases, like throughput constraints that we're under that other solutions like that might not be. And it allows us to, it allows them to use like lower frequency radios, for example, which have longer range, but less throughput that wouldn't necessarily be compatible with a system like ours. So it is totally possible and a good idea. It just depends like specifically what sensors they're using and what they're streaming to see if it's compatible or not.
Well, I would just add, when you're doing that, it's possible maybe to co-locate sensors.
Absolutely, 100%.
We had another comment from a participant saying that they recently led a student tour on the Orlando Police Department Crime Center Ops Center. The center fuses the video feeds from their drones, police body cams, and traffic cameras for the Ops Center LE Watch officer to provide over-the-shoulder real-time support to responding officers. Always more data, better. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Well,
and
in Charlottesville, I'll just say this one thing. We've now seen a number of recruits that have applied came specifically because they wanted to be remote pilots.
Very interesting.
Cool.
Very interesting. All right. So you bring the responder out to the public. You tell people this is what it can do. What kind of responses are you getting?
I mean, Don can answer this too, but I think it's been pretty overwhelming. I mean, so many agencies have wanted DFR for years, but having to piece together a solution from like 5 or 6 different vendors in order to make it work have prevented them from adopting it, or the regulatory constraints have prevented them from adopting it because the staffing requirement is so high. And I think when agencies are presented with the option to work with one vendor in order to make DFR happen in their community without a crazy staffing overhead, they are really, really excited to adopt it.
I do want to make a comment too, and just because I do get a lot of questions about this. So just to comment, we are expecting a rule on BVLOS flight in the United States. However, I don't think it would be until 2025. But additionally, it's important to note that wouldn't really change the requirements. It would just mean that you didn't have to file additional paperwork. So the rule will probably say you need all of these additional sort of tools to meet the safety case, and then you can do it without having a specific necessarily waiver. So
But I think
I,
I know
I,
we as drone responders are pushing hard on the technology, the proven technology in place of visual observers, which have been proven not to be effective.
right.
We can say that the technology is far better than any one person. And Kansas State University just came out with a study that says about 800 feet is about the maximum efficacy you're going to get out of it. And that's if you've got good visibility, if you maintain your attention and don't get distracted, and all those things. So what we're doing at Drone Responders is trying to get the proven technology out there. And once it's proven, that it can be easily replicated in the other cities.
Mhm.
So here's practical question coming in. How do you work with agencies accounting for sporadic funding cycles? That is a thing.
Yeah, oh, it's definitely a good question. So, the way that we primarily offer DFR is as a part of Brinc Safeguard. So kind of what that includes is an initial delivery of hardware, so station responder. Then at year 2.5 of the agreement, they get our latest stuff. So responder 2, next generation drone, station 2, and the same at year 5. Then if a drone ever crashes, something happens, you need a replacement part, whatever, we will replace full airframes an unlimited number of times. This is a big deal. I mean, a lot of agencies, they might crash a drone, God forbid, and then their program is grounded until they can find another $30,000, $35,000 to replace their M300, which is really hard to do on a short time scale. So with something like this, you have budgetary certainty. Even if something goes wrong, your program will continue operating no matter what. We also include regulatory assistance. So if an agency wants to go for something like a BVLOS waiver without a VO, we will help them through that, help them write the applications. There are certain parts that wear out in DFR systems. So the batteries are only good to like 300 or 400 charge cycles. We'll replace batteries. The motors are only good to a certain number of flight hours. We'll replace motors as that's required. Even the doors on our stations can only cycle a certain number of times before they need to be serviced. So we'll send technicians out to service all of those parts. We include software licenses for everyone in a department, unlimited data storage, training. I mean, everything that you would expect. So it's really like a one button press. I want DFR, and we can come in and help with everything else.
So
Yeah,
predictability is one of the major, you know.
yeah.
100%.
When I
Knowing that you're always going to have the latest technology, right? You're not going to have to keep fighting this budget fight every time a new drone comes out that has a game-changing capability. You're just going to get it.
Yep. And what I talk to chiefs and command staff all the time is we have to stop looking at drones as a piece of equipment. It's a program. It is a UAS program. It has staffing. It has software, hardware, policy, regulatory issues. And so when we can come in and say, here is everything. This is what it's going to cost you for your program, and it's the certainty. When you talk to agencies when they do their drone training, if they do drone training, they sometimes they don't like to do drone training because what happens when they do drone training? They break the drones, right? So they don't, or they give the officers, the new pilots, the old drones that they're actually not going to be deploying out in the field because they're afraid to wreck them. When we say, here's the drones, if you wreck it, give us a call, we'll replace it, we'll fix it, whatever needs to happen. There's certainty, as Blake said, in the program, and you get the head nods from the police chiefs like that makes sense to me, right? Because we want a really robust UAS program.
Well, as one of those chiefs, that one of the things that I always hated was when you had to get multiple pieces of things to pull together and figure out how they interface. And then when they don't interface, you have the other companies pointing at each other saying it's their problem. In this case, you're bringing a turnkey solution, which is kind of exciting.
And, develop from scratch to all work together. I mean, we go pretty deep when we engineer these drones. We're doing a lot of low-level engineering, and our software grew up right along with the hardware. So from the very beginning, they were designed to be deeply compatible, and it just allowed us to build a really good solution. I mean, more
So,
importantly, a solution that can actually be adopted by agencies because it doesn't cost $1 million a year to deploy. because you have to pay so much money to like a consulting company. It just doesn't work that way anymore.
So I've got a question for Don. So Don, DFR, this has been your dream. I know one of the reasons that you went to Brinc was that you had a cooperative listener from a leader who was going to say, "Tell me where we should go," and like
Yeah,
you've taken it.
yeah, there were people in front of me at Chula Vista who did an outstanding job, and Chief Kennedy, we mentioned earlier, she had the leadership, the thought, to take the chance on DFR. That is incredible, and I was happy being a police captain at Chula Vista, and then I met Blake Resnick, and I don't want to say I wasn't happy any longer, but he came in with this passion, this I don't want to call him a young kid, but he had the energy, and he flat out told me multiple times. He just said, "Don, I want to build the best drone for public safety. Like, let's build this DFR solution." And the next thing I knew, I was retiring and coming to work with Blake and developing this. Our engineers, first and foremost, we are an American company, NDA compliant. I don't know if Blake mentioned that earlier, but our engineers love having tours in our office in Seattle. They love talking to cops because they don't want to build drones in a vacuum. They want to build a drone that is going to be useful, that's going to save lives. And, you as the customer, tell us what it is and we'll build it.
I'm going to ask this question just because I have had the opportunity to meet you before, Blake. So, did you get everything you wanted in this responder, or are you already like, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do
Well, I mean, never. Yeah, I mean, there's always a bunch of features that you want to stuff into these products that end up like slipping to the next version. But I don't know. I think that's actually a really exciting thing about the space. Like, you look at your phone, this thing hasn't really improved that much in a while, right?
Not
Like
since they added the camera.
like it totally invented a whole new market, a whole new industry, right? But between like, I don't know, iPhone 6 and 12 or 14 or wherever we're at right now, hasn't really improved that much. Like, they kind of got it roughly right at some point in that like continuum. But I don't think we're even remotely close to that point with public safety drones or with DFR drones. I think every single next generation of these platforms are going to be a crazy jump ahead. Much more flight time, much better optics, better thermal imagers, better stabilization, better radios, even like brand new capabilities that aren't on any systems that currently exist, that in the future will be completely standard. So no, anyway, the answer is yes. There is still a lot that I want on these things, and that is a good thing and is exciting, and yeah, makes a drone company that's trying to build public safety tools a pretty exciting place to work. That will.
So Blake, how many times do you have to tell Don, "Okay, Don, wait a little bit, wait a little bit. That's next."
Yeah.
He tells
Well,
me that
the
all the
problem is, I
time. I'm
think we
like,
agree.
come on, hurry up, hurry up,
I
hurry up.
know.
How hard could it be, right? Just make a drone fly, right?
All right, so let me wrap it up. We've only got a few more minutes here. Favorite feature of the responder? You go first, Don.
I like the red and blue lights and the siren. And the markings. I think it's so simple, but the community understands it. When cops, firefighters see this, it's the aha moment. This is public safety. To me, all the other features, Blake will talk about all the best things, but for me, just for the transparency and for the community, I think it's the best thing.
I'll give two. I think the most important really is the radar integration because it's allowing DFR to be viable. But my favorite feature is, it's actually a software feature. It's probably our AR street name overlays. So like labeling streets in our video feed, Main Street, 4th Street, like even visualizing call for service locations as a beam of light. All of that AR stuff is I think just really cool and really practically useful.
I do want to just mention very quickly, because I think I may have assumed a level of familiarity. Brinc is located in Seattle. They do all of their manufacturing in the United States. That is still true, yes. And they are NDAA compliant. So it will meet any of those requirements as they come up. All right. Well, thank you again so very much for coming on. Always appreciate the conversation. Always appreciate seeing what you do. People can reach you.
Oh yeah.
Who should they reach out to?
Well, I think brinkdrones.com is like a good place to start. Has a bunch of information about our products and company and everything else. For me, LinkedIn is really good. Just Blake Resnick. I assume the same is probably true for you, Don.
Yes, anybody LinkedIn or don.redmond@brinkdrones.com.
Okay. And I do want to wrap up. It is 4 o'clock, and I know people have meetings to go to. Don, I know you have a hard spot. We're very grateful for your time. So please step out if you need to. Chief, coming up in August in the Atlanta area. Chief, we can't hear you. You're on mute.
Yeah, it'll be Tyler Perry Studios in Georgia. It's outside of Atlanta. It'll be the Public Safety Drone Summit in Georgia. So we're excited about doing that as well. And Brink's going to be there as well.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We will see you next month, first Tuesday of August.
Hey, don't
Thanks
forget,
again.
this is recorded on Drone Life TV, and you can see it anytime you want
Yes.
after and tell others about it as well.
Take care.
See everybody.
Again.